Hi, Johnny. Okay, let's look at our sheet for our announcements. At the top, very top, for once, this paragraph in our thoughts and prayers is longer than the continue to remember. Usually it's the other way around, but maybe we just have more information, you know. Okay, Donna Warren fell and broke her ankle. Didn't like to hear that. Janie is, as we all know, has been diagnosed with bladder cancer, and she'll be going April the 7th for some treatment with her doctor. And they have other things in mind, but she's not sure what the progress is. She just knows she's going in outpatient on the 7th of April to start with this. Angela Smith is requesting prayers for her family because she has lost 2 more of her relatives recently. She also requests prayers for her cousin Linda McGee, who is in ICU in California with a massive heart attack, and her friend Jean Poe in California, who has been bedridden for many years and is not doing well. Gloria Ramos would like for us to have prayer for her mother-in-law, Cecilia, whose health is declining. She is scheduled for an MRI on her brain. Sharon Nolan fell and broke a shoulder. Barbara Conley has been moved to Camp Care Center in Camp, Texas. Her address is on here. After Barbara had a stroke, she moved closer to her daughter. And so her daughter didn't have so far to come to see about her. Pam Griffin requesting prayers for her nephew, Jason Allman, who was just diagnosed with tongue cancer. Christy Wilhelm requests prayers for her mom, who's been diagnosed with breast cancer. A lot of cancer right now. Jackie Brotherton requesting prayers for strength. Judith Morris requesting prayers for her daughter-in-law, whose pregnancy is high risk. Darlene DeVos requests prayers for a medical procedure scheduled for March 23rd. Robert Pate came forward Sunday requesting prayers. Recovering from surgery is Jean Simpson. She was here Sunday and she looks well. She said she's having some dizzy spells and she's going to have an MRI done to see if they can discover why she's having these dizzy spells. Judy Shush has a son-in-law named Keaton, and he was deployed. Words of encouragement will be appreciated. He will be deployed and away from his family for 8 months. Has his address on here if you'd like to send him a card to encourage him or something else for him. Undergoing chemotherapy and radiation, Jacob McGeckey's teacher, her name is Sarah Green. Then we have our continue to remember, and our listing, some have been on it for a long time, and some not quite so long. So we want to remember all of them also. And this sounds good to me. Coming up, Bridgewood Ladies' Day. We haven't had anything like that in a long time. We need something like that. Saturday, May 15th, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. For more information, see Pam Harris or Patricia Isidore. Is that how she pronounces her name? Does anybody know?
I think so.
Isidore, okay. Our prayer this morning is going to be said by Mamie at the proper time, and our songs are going to be led by Jean.
Ruby,
Uh-huh.
this Ladies' Day is mainly just for us. You know,
Okay.
it's not, we're not advertising it for everybody like a big
Okay.
thing. We may do something like that later, but Pam said that a lot of our newer members are
Mhm.
like, we don't know the women here.
I know,
You
that's
know?
true.
And I'm sure some of us are saying, well, we know each other, but there's others that
Now we need
haven't.
to include,
And
yes.
Patricia was the one who suggested this, and so it's going to be mainly something for, you know, for us.
Uh-huh, okay. Bridgewood ladies, okay.
Okay.
That sounds good. Anybody else? Okay, Jean, you ready? Here you go.
And we could add Angie.
Yeah, yes, we could add Angie, yeah.
Yeah.
She's
Angie,
welcome.
you are one of us.
Yeah.
That's all.
We're having one too along the same lines, and I don't remember exactly what that is.
Oh, boy. Well, we can stand too.
I may have two back to back.
Number 134, 134, faith is the victory. Encamped along the hills of light, ye Christian soldiers rise, and press the battle ere the night shall fill the glowing skies. Against the flowing veils below, let all our strength be held. Faith is the victory that overcomes the world. Faith is the victory. Faith is the victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. His banner over us is love, our sword, the word of God. We tread the road the saints above, with shouts of triumph trod. By faith they like a whirlwind swept on o'er every fear. The faith by which they conquered death is still our shining shield. Faith is the victory. Faith is the victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. To him who overcomes the foe, white raiment shall we give. Before the angels he shall know, his name confessed in heaven. Then onward from the hills of light, our hearts with love of flame will vanquish all the hosts of night in Jesus' conquering name. Faith is the victory. Faith is the victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. Let's pray. God, our Father in heaven, we come before you this day and thank you for all the wonderful blessings that you've given us throughout our lives. Please be with us as we go into our study. Be with Sarah as she guides our class and teaches us and help us to become better Christians. We're thankful that we're going to have a ladies' day so we can all get better acquainted and maybe meet some new members that we haven't even met before. Be with us now and guide our steps and always follow you. In Jesus' name, amen.
I guess I did leave mine. Yes, this is mine because there's the ice cream that I put on. I listened to the lesson and I realized that talking through that on the recording is not as clear. And so I'm going to not use that. And I think we're coming out of some of the pandemic, and that is a good thing. And I just hope, though, that we continue to do those things like masking and all that will help us to continue to come out. Oh, there's that piece of paper there. Yesterday, I was not feeling well at all, and some of it is this stupid time change, okay? My body has not quite caught up with the time, and maybe it will, and maybe it won't, I don't know. But,
You're not the only one.
yeah.
I want you to know that.
Oh, good. Now, Gary always says, this time change doesn't bother me. He's the person who gets up to take a nap. So, yeah, it doesn't bother him, but it does all of us. And children, it's really hard on children in school and so on. But we'll probably keep doing this crazy stuff for I don't know how long. But then I've also had some stomach issues. That's why I've got a carbonated drink up here and not just regular water, because the carbonation seems to settle me a little bit better. Now, what we're going to do today, I realized I thought we had gotten almost through with the chapter on showing partiality. But there were some things right near the end, the jewels that he has listed on making the case against partiality that we want to look at. But I want you to turn to page 58 in the book. And he has question number 3, discuss the following jewels. Partiality is not consistent with Christ's glory. It's based on outward appearance. Impartiality is not the way of God, and showing partiality brings judgment against the sinner. And then number 4, discuss God's mercy. And those are some things that we're going to discuss today, and I do want your input. I'll have a question or two here and there, but I want you to be thinking about those things and what you can contribute on those, because as I thought about some things in this lesson, there are some things that we as the church need to be aware of. There are some things that I need to be aware of. And but first of all here, James starts out talking about how showing partiality is on page 52. It's not consistent with Christ's glory. It's not consistent with glorifying God. And when you think about that, what is consistent with glorifying God or with Christ's glory? What did Jesus say in Matthew 5? in the Sermon on the Mount?
Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify
Your
your
Father.
Father, which is in heaven. That was
Yeah.
my first memory verse.
Oh, good. Good, but that's exactly what he said. And they see your good works and glorify the Father, not yourselves. And sometimes that's kind of hard, you know, to make a distinction. But that's what glorify. And so in relation to showing partiality, then we do good to who? Just the rich? Just the, yeah, we do good to, and in Galatians, when we were studying Galatians, Paul says, as we have opportunity, do good to everybody, but especially who? Yeah, us. And so we are to look after our own people first in doing good to them, and if there are needs, and in particular, like during this pandemic, if there have been needs here in the church, and there have been, you know, we're to take care of that first. And then as we can, reach out then to those in the world. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then Jesus' mission in Luke 19:10, he said that he came to do what? Came not to serve, not to be served, not to serve, but be served. I got that backwards. He came not to be served, but to serve, and to what? Give his life a ransom for many. And also that he came to seek and to save the lost. So should that be our motive and our purpose? And you can't do that if you are showing partiality. And then that second jewel, partiality is based on outward appearance. And I had a bunch of examples here. But let's just read here from James chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. For if there should come into your assembly a man with gold rings and fine apparel, and there should also come in a poor man in filthy clothes, and you pay attention to the one wearing the fine clothes and say to him, you sit here in this good place, and you say to the poor man, you stand over there or sit here at my footstool. And he said, have you, going on to verse 4, but have you not shown partiality among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? And we'll deal with that in just a little bit. But yes, partiality is there based on outward appearance. And we should not base our judgment of others or our acceptance of others just based on outward things. And of course, he uses here, and all of you are familiar with this, so we won't spend a lot of time on this example, but when Samuel was sent to the house of Jesse to anoint a king, was it the oldest one? Was it the strongest looking one? No. Wasn't any of those, but, oh yeah, we've got this young one out in the shepherding flock. That was the one, because God looks where?
The heart.
The heart. God knows our insides. Now, oh dear, I shouldn't think of this, but Gary sometimes tells me that I look nice. And I said, but you're just looking at the outside. You know, the inside has got to be good too. And he said, oh, your liver looks good too.
That big hair.
Yeah. But God does look on the heart, on what is within us, what we're thinking, who we really are. And that's what counts. And I was thinking about some examples. In fact, one I asked Gary if I could use today, and he reminded me of the scripture that was good to go on that. But one person that I thought about right quickly when I was thinking about judging by outward appearances, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Robert Reed. He was a missionary to Portugal. And we had met him, or we had seen him at different mission workshops or at the HCU lectureship, just seen him at a distance and kind of knew who he was. But when we were in Abilene, the church where we attended helped support him. And so he came and reported to the church, what you need to know about Roberts, he has cerebral palsy. He's confined to a wheelchair. He speaks Portuguese fluently, but he laughs and says, I speak Portuguese about like I do English, because he can't speak real plainly. He went on a mission trip in the early 70s, I think, or late 60s, with a group from Abilene Christian to Portugal, and he decided, I want to go there and be a missionary. So he went there and was there 21 years. He went there by himself. If you were his parents, what would you have done? But he went there by himself. He made contact with the owner of a restaurant because Robert couldn't feed himself. He didn't have control of his hands. And the owner of the restaurant agreed to feed him at off times, at non-peak times. Guess what the owner of the restaurant became after a while? A Christian. He hired someone to tutor him in Portuguese, and also had someone to help him dress and so on. He would take his wheelchair to the park and hand out literature and had his Bible and would talk about, he also laughed about the fact that Bible companies loved him because he had trouble turning to pages, and so he went through several Bibles all the time. But there were 190 baptisms that resulted from private studies with him. Also, he converted a woman who became his wife. And there were several churches that were established, and many of them remained with local leadership and local preaching. And Robert has written a book. Of course, he didn't write it. He transcribed it to his wife, and she wrote it. And the title of it is, You See Disability, I See Opportunity. But you see, when you would look at Robert, say, on the campus that he went to ACU for and got a degree, I think, in Latin. But when you would see Robert on campus, you would see the disability. You wouldn't see a missionary. You wouldn't see someone who had a heart for teaching the gospel. And God said, I can use him. And with him. No, not him. Yes, I can use him. You see, God saw his heart, and God knew that he could do something that probably none of the rest of us could do, And it's just been amazing to me to see what he has done. I looked him up online, and the last thing I found about him was in 2015. I think he's still alive because I haven't read an obituary anywhere of him, but it's just amazing. And yet, that's looking at the outside, but God sees the heart. But you think about other people, perhaps, that you have known. I was thinking about Gary. My friends told me I was messing up the plan. We were supposed to all marry missionaries, and they said, you're messing up the plan. You're marrying him. He's just a new Christian. Well, I guess I messed up the plan. I didn't know what was going to happen, down the road. And I think about Bob and Marcia. Who knew that, but God looks on the heart, and God sees what we maybe don't see. And so showing partiality based on outward appearance or based on where you came from is not good. And also, and I hate to say this, but I will. I have a friend whose dad had some major neck problems. And so wearing a tie was just he just couldn't bear that. He was asked to help with the Lord's Supper at a congregation where he attended. And when the men met together, now he had on a suit coat, suit, had the whole suit on, okay, not just a coat, and a nice shirt, but he didn't have on a tie. He was dismissed from waiting on the Lord's table. Is that judging by appearances?
Yes.
And is it placing a burden? And that was the one that I asked Gary. I said, is it okay for me to use it? And he said, yeah. He said, we have traditions. Just like the scribes and the Pharisees. We have certain traditions, and sometimes those traditions become a burden to others. And I grew up under the tradition that you wear your Sunday best. Didn't all of you? Yeah. Your Sunday go to meeting clothes. Yeah. But can that be a stumbling block at times? If someone doesn't have, it truly can. And also, we can get to, I remember as a teenager, and teenagers do this, but, when the can-cans were real popular, and also the squaw dresses, and you had to, how many yards do you have in yours? Well, I had more than anybody else because my grandmother was real good at handwork, and she could put all of that rickrack on there by hand, and I had more rows of rickrack and more skirt, and woo, and I liked wearing that to church because was that the right attitude? Now that's a teenager, but sometimes we see old teenagers, don't we? That I'm wearing my best, and you better notice it. And there's nothing wrong with wearing your best to church. But if we make judgments based on that, then there is something wrong. And we can have our traditions that can be a real burden to others. And that's judging by appearances. And we just don't need to do that. I could go on and on and on about some traditions, but I don't want to. But you probably have seen similar things, and you may have wondered about that. And the more you travel the world and see how the emphasis on the church is not on buildings. The emphasis of the church is not on what you wear. You should be modest, but that's not what it is when you get right down to it. Yeah.
Sarah, I remember the first time I ever saw a lady in a pair of pants at church.
Yeah.
And it was on either a Wednesday night or a Sunday night, and she was a visitor, and this was back in the early 70s, before we moved on this side of town. And I thought, who let that woman in the door?
Did someone come in? Yeah. And that was an issue, a real issue for a while. And I think I told y'all about a congregation where we went to, and we've been in southern Louisiana, and there it's real casual because it's hot and muggy. So people are more casual in the way they dress. And then we moved to Dallas, and to a congregation that had been the congregation on that side of town. And so the elders asked me about teaching the ladies' class, and I said, okay. I said, would it be okay if I wore a pantsuit to teach class, because I had in Louisiana, they didn't care what I wore as long as I wore something, you know. And one of the elders said, well, there is some women who won't come if you do that. So I said, okay, I'm not going to let what I wear keep someone from coming to class. So I had to buy some fabric and make some skirts right quickly that would go with the tops that I had. But, you know, we do have, and sometimes we are in that transition period, you know, where, oh, I'm not sure this is right, or I'm not sure this is good. And so we have to bear with one another through those times. But that is judging by outward appearance, isn't it? By what we wear. But over on page 54, because we need to keep going through here, the third jewel is that partiality is not the way of God. And here he has verses 4 through 7, so let's look at those. Have you not shown partiality among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my brethren, has God not chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Do not the rich oppress you and drag you into the courts? And do they not blaspheme the noble name by which you were called? And you remember in Acts chapter 10, when Peter went to the house of Cornelius, what did he say? I perceive that God is what? No respecter of persons, but in every nation. You know, God does not see like we see. He doesn't see that outward appearance. He doesn't see the color of skin. He doesn't see where you come from or whatever. But he looks at the heart. And yet, did Peter regress? Can we regress sometimes? Can we know something, but in the pressure of the moment, do something? And we talked about that when we studied Galatians. So there's where we need to be patient with one another in regard to that. But notice he said that God has chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith. And I thought about 1 Corinthians 1 and verse 26 and following. And so let's just go to that. I think I had it marked here somewhere. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 1, verse 26. Paul is writing there because you see in Corinth, they were having problems of, not getting along with each other, not seeing as God sees, and there was division among them. And he said, for you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called, but God has chosen to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. Oh. I knew that was there, but it just dawned on me, and I've got it underlined and something written out beside it, but it just dawned on me. You know, is it easy to trust in, for instance, our education, our talent, our own abilities? Is it easy to trust in those things and not trust in God? Or not bring glory to God, but the glory in those things? And sometimes, in fact, I visited a congregation where I actually knew the preacher there and knew some of the members, but not I was a little bit late, so I was sitting near the back and not up with my friends and all that knew me. Well, and this woman introduced herself to me, which that was nice, you know, and then she said, I'm so glad you're here. We have the most wonderful preacher. Well, that's okay. We have a good one too. They have a good one at Collierville. There's some good ones all around here, but where's our trust? Is our trust in the talent of the preacher, or in the education of the preacher, or is our trust in God? And anyway, but God has chosen those things to put to shame things in the world. And I think about the atheists and those that are, you know, think that they're so smart out here. And a little child knows more about God than they do. You know, and they'll find out one of these days. They'll find out. But at any rate, where was I? Partiality is not the way of God. God has chosen these. Why did God cut down the army that Gideon had? Why did he cut it down to 300?
So it would know that they know that it was God.
Right. So that they would know that it was God, not because of their strength. And you know, we may look at the Bridgewood congregation, we may think, oh, you know, but hey, we've lost so many members. Maybe God is saying, you know, we can do something. I can do something with this group. And when we do, who will receive the glory? God will receive the glory. And I honestly believe that God can do and will do with this congregation. But we have got to trust and believe that God can do and will do. And this is a good congregation about reaching out and reaching those who are different from us. We've got a lot of members here who are different from us. And that's good. That's good. And we have been good at doing that, but we can always do better. Now, the fourth jewel down here, because I don't want to spend forever on that. Oh, yeah, but I do want to mention, as he does here on page 54, Revelation 3:17. The church in Laodicea, they were wealthy physically, but what does Jesus say to them? You don't know that you're poor and wretched and miserable and blind, you know, and naked and all that. You know, so sometimes, you know, we might look at this big church over here, you know, it's got all the money and all the power and all everything. Well, God's looking at the inside. Now, it may be just fine on the inside, but it may not be, too. God doesn't look at those things. He doesn't look at the budget, but he looks at the heart and at what we can do. And fourth jewel, showing partiality brings judgment against the sinner. This one was the one that I thought was really interesting, the way George Carmen approaches it here on page 55. But in verses, whatever it is, 8 through 11, and let's just look at those right quickly. If you really fulfill the royal law according to the scriptures, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you do well. But if you show partiality, you commit sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. For whoever shall keep the whole law and yet stumble in one point, he is guilty of all. For he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not murder. Now, if you do not commit adultery, but you do murder, you have become a transgressor of the law. So speak and so do as those who will be judged by the law of liberty. For judgment is without mercy to the one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. And we'll be looking at that, the last two verses of that in just a little bit. But notice what he says there. You do well if you fulfill that royal law. And in fact, Jesus said, you know, the first commandment was to love God, right? With all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Second, love your neighbor as yourself. And then he said, on these two hang all the law and the prophets. Because if you're loving God, and if you're loving your neighbor as yourself, are you going to gossip about that person? Are you going to speak evil against that person? Are you going to murder, kill, or covet, or hate, or whatever? That if you are really striving to love your neighbor as yourself, and but he points out here, at least James points out here, how if you just offend in one point, you're guilty of the whole law. And that, to understand that exactly what he's saying here, the Jews, and see, James is writing mainly to Jewish Christians. And the Jews had this idea of a credit and debit sheet, bookkeeping. You know, well, I didn't commit adultery, I didn't murder anybody. Oh, I coveted, well, okay. But two outweighs one, you know. They kind of kept score. And when they got to the end of the day, if the good outweighed the bad, then they were okay. And that's the way they looked at the law. And in fact, when you read about some of the things that they did as ways to get around, you know, a Sabbath day's journey and those kinds of things, ways to get around some things in the law. But the royal law, as he calls it here, is to love your neighbor as yourself. And in 1 John 4, 20 through 21, you know, John says, if you don't love your brother whom you have seen, how can you love God whom you haven't seen? You know, because what? You are made in the image of God, aren't you? Yeah, each one of us is in the image of God. And if we can't love and be kind to one another who are made in the image of God, how can we say we love God? And so that's really important. But he has a question down here. He says at the end of the second paragraph, does it amaze you to learn that the Holy Spirit uses the illustration of murder to explain to us the sin of showing partiality? And I've just got in here, what do you think? Do we think showing partiality is that bad? Probably not. We don't want to say that but sometimes in our, but it is that bad. It is bad. And sometimes we don't want to see it that way. Now, in the last paragraph under that says, James has made a biblical case against showing partiality. The lost world in which we live needs those of us who are Christians to lead the way in treating all men without prejudice and partiality. It doesn't matter if the person is rich or poor, black or white, or a different nationality than us, and so on. We do not need to show partiality. And I was remembering in the church in San Antonio where we were, there was an older man, and we hardly knew him because he was very ill and had to be at home all the time, but we knew his wife. His first name was Pat, but I can't remember the last name right now. But in the 50s and 60s, now he was a white man, okay? In the 50s and 60s, he drove the bus for the Southwestern Christian College chorus. And Southwestern Christian is a black school. And there were times when he would need gas and he would pull up to the service station for gas. And you know, people need to use the restroom. And there were times when the owner would come out and say, no, they can't use that restroom. And he would get the kids back on the bus and say, I'm sorry, I can't buy your gas. And go on. Now some would say, oh, well, you know, okay, go ahead. And there's a movie about Jackie Robinson, I think, where a similar thing happened, you know, and he said, well, I won't buy your gas. And I thought, well, Brother Pat said that a long time ago, you know. But, you know, we do have people like him who were showing the world that, yes, these are just people. These are just people made in the image of God. And he ends that by saying the Lord will bless us when we treat all people with honor and respect that's due to them. And then, I'm going to finish this if I don't care what. I was going to bring my phone up here and forgot to. But the basis for judgment is mercy. The basis for judgment is mercy. So speak and so act as those who are to be judged under the law of liberty, for judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. And he says here at the bottom of page 55 that James concludes his discussion on partiality by mentioning the law of liberty and the need to be merciful. And he asks about what is the law of liberty, and he gives here two explanations, but I see a harmony with both of them. He said some believe it's just a whole gospel message, and others believe it refers to showing mercy. Isn't mercy a part of the whole gospel message? So I don't see a conflict there as much as a harmony. Judgment is without mercy to those who show no mercy. But the gospel includes mercy. In fact, in Ephesians chapter 2, I think I've got that marked somewhere. Ephesians chapter 2, yes. When Paul is talking about in the first few verses, he says, "In you he made alive who were dead in trespasses and sins in which you walked," and so on. And then he says in verse 4, "But God, who is rich in mercy, because of his great love wherewith he loved us, even when we were dead in trespasses, made us alive together in Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up together, and made us sit together in heavenly places in Christ Jesus." God, who is rich in mercy. If God, aren't you glad God is rich in mercy? Wouldn't any of us be here? God is rich in mercy. And if we are to be followers of God as dear children, and I think there's somewhere Paul says that is it in Ephesians? He says it somewhere. Oh yeah, in Ephesians chapter 5. He says, "Therefore be imitators," or I think the Old King James says be followers, "be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in love as Christ has loved us." If we're going to be imitators of God, if God is rich in mercy, what should we be? Rich in mercy. Yeah, we should be rich in mercy. And in Psalms, when we studied Psalm 136, and we're not going to read through that, but I think every other verse says that his mercy endures forever. But let's look at Psalm 86 and verse 15, because I thought this one was too good to pass up. Psalm 86 and verse 15. But you, O Lord, are a God full of compassion and gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in mercy and truth. Now, mercy is important. Truth is also important. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But God is abundant in mercy. And God was merciful throughout the Old Testament. He was merciful to his people and to those of other nations who, like Naaman the leper and others that Rahab and so on, as we'll be looking at later. But he says here that mercy is a feeling of sympathy, active compassion, the desire of relieving the miserable. And I think I read somewhere that mercy is love with legs. That mercy is love with legs. And Jesus said that basically the same thing in Matthew chapter 5, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And I don't think I've told you, but if I have, that's okay. I thought about this. Mother had a home health care nurse. And in fact, she also, I think, took care of Daddy too. And she would call Daddy Jack-o'-lantern. That's his name was Jack. She would tease him, call him Jack-o'-lantern all the time. But all the time when she would come and take care of something, like Daddy's feet were in terrible condition, and she would be there taking care of the wounds on his feet and everything, and she would just say over and over, have mercy, have mercy, have mercy. And when she was taking care of Mother, you know, and something she would say, oh, have mercy, have mercy. And Mother got to where she just called her have mercy instead of her name, you know, but Mother asked her one time, why do you say that? And she said, well, every person that I take care of is elderly. And they all have some really, really troubling things, some hurtful things for me to take care of. And I'm just constantly praying to God that I can have mercy, that I can have mercy to do what needs to be done. And, you know, that just meant a lot to me in thinking about how we should be. And wouldn't it be great if when others saw us come in, they would say, there comes have mercy, because that's what we should be known for, the mercy that we show others. And notice he says that judgment is without mercy to the one who shows no mercy. What did Jesus say in Matthew 6 at the end of the model prayer? If you forgive others, what will God do? He forgives you. If you don't forgive others, He doesn't forgive you. That's important. Forgiveness that we should have for one another, and the showing of mercy to one another. And I know all of you are familiar with this parable, and Gary, I don't think has taught on this one yet, but if you're not familiar with it, just wait until he gets to it. But the parable in Matthew 18, where Jesus illustrated mercy and forgiveness, and he said a man owed 10,000 talents. And 1 talent equaled 20 years of wages. Whew. This is page 56 as he's telling us this. I think I have that note written in my Bible. So the man could never, ever, 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 ever pay that debt. And so why did he choose such a large sum to illustrate? How big is my debt toward God? Bigger than that, isn't it? Even the goodest person in here, our debt is bigger than that. And then the master forgave him, was merciful and forgave him. But he went out and found somebody that just owed him 100 denarii. That was 100 days' wages. That's not very much, is it, compared to? But he said, pay me everything. Threw him in prison and all until he could pay everything. And when the master learned of it, what did he do? That one. So, it says here, and I've wondered about that. Have I done that sometimes? Have I been too... But he says here in the last paragraph, the lesson is simple. We must show mercy to others if we expect to receive any from the Lord. In our prejudicial world, it would be wise for all of us to learn to be more accepting toward those who are different from us. A large dose of mercy will help us to conquer prejudice. We must guard against showing preferential treatment to some people while looking down on others. We must treat people fairly, because to do any less is sin. And so I was thinking, and I don't know how much time we have left, but I was thinking about ways we can show mercy, and if you watch John's Motivation Monday, you learn some things that, some people think that garden out here is just crazy work, busy work. But we had a family of 3, I think, who visited with Tanisha Sunday morning. They're not members. She had asked them to come help in the garden. And they did, and got to know some of our members, and they were here. And I think John said 2 other people from the community were visiting Sunday morning. So there's 5 people. Of course, 1 was a child. So 4 adults, not Christians, visiting here from the community. And I was just wondering, of all of the area congregations, how many, and this was not nice. Here I was going, comparing ourselves by ourselves, and that's not wise, But I was wondering how many had 4 adult non-Christians visit that Sunday morning. So that's an outreach. Now, were they different from us? Yeah, some of them were. I helped a little bit with the pop-up, and that was interesting. And we had way too many out there helping, and I thought, well, there are other things that I can do that I think are best suited for me. But it was really good to see people who needed some things, and so thankful, and also who needed those the Bibles and all. And those Bibles from World Bible School have the first lesson of World Bible School in the back of them. And it has our contact information in the front. So, you don't know what good will be done from those kinds of things. And anyway, I was just trying to think of other ways that we can reach out to this community, because there are lost people here. And many times, the lost people who are poor see their need, see their spiritual need more than the lost people who live in the mansions over the hilltops in the gated communities in Flower Mound and Frisco and places like that. Tanya and I was picking up something that I had bought on Facebook Marketplace, and it was close to where she has her treatment, so it was real easy. It was over in Frisco. It was in a gated community. and I had to show my driver's license. The men out there at the gate were in suits. Now, I've been in gated communities out in Colleyville. Peyton dated a girl that lived in gated community out there, and they just had a guy sitting in a little box, you know. But I mean, this was, and then when we drove in, I have never seen houses this big. I mean, like 4 or 5 stories with these big porticos out. I mean, castle-like houses. I wonder if they see that they have a need for anything. And this woman that I was buying from lived on the back of the thing. Her house was not quite that big. And there's a weird story about that, but I just want to. But, you know, there are, and sometimes we want to get those people to come to church because they make us look good. Well, yeah, it would be good to get those people too. They're lost too. But a lot of times, they're not going to see a need. And the church is bigger in Ghana, in Africa, Ghana, West Africa, than it is, I think, in the U.S. They see a need, and people are hungry for some hope. Because, you know, if you've got a mansion over the hilltop in a gated community in Frisco, do you need a mansion over the hilltop in that right land? You do, but you don't know you do. And I'm sorry, I probably went over time, but I wanted to finish that. And next time I'm going to bring my watch up here, my phone up here or something. Well, hey, we started about 4 minutes late, so I didn't do too bad.
I would really like to sing all the verses of this song. It's 613, 613. And I didn't find any verses that I could cut out. So, and it's really a short song. Take my life and let it be.
Oh, good. We're going to sing verse 4. That's the one we always skip. Verse 4 is the one we always skip. So we're going to sing it too.
Okay, sing 5 and 6?
No, let's sing all of it. But I was just saying that was the one we always skip.
Okay. And 613, the second one. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to Thee. Take my moments and my days, let them go in ceaseless praise. Take my hands and let them move at the impulse of Thy love. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for Thee. Take my voice and let me sing, always only for
probably shouldn't have said anything about verse 4, but every time we sing that in worship, we omit verse 4. We sing all of the verses except verse 4, and I'll ask Gary, I said, are we not giving our silver and gold, you know? Do we not want the Lord to take that too? So I'm glad we sung all of it.
It may be that not a might withhold.
Yeah, that may be the part that you don't want. But it's all his anyway. I brought those 3 barrel ice cream to celebrate my birthday. And I had this on, and I was trying to eat ice cream. Forgot that I had it on. And when you sing, and I told them, the and the fact that he protected it. And I did get my contribution on to Sunset to say. I'm gonna get that stuff back on my desk and things get lost. You know, I have, and I told him I was going to bring, some of those brochures. I know. I got so far behind, I didn't do that time, so I'll do it next time, because I was doing and I just got it now, got this. And part of me wants to do the illustration of Jacob's ladder.
Can I get some help? Okay, let's go this way so we can get, go across. Okay, just hang on to me.
Oh, yeah, I'm trying to, I'm just trying
Okay,
Hi,
okay. I didn't want to have to go across the course.
this way.
Was that Jerry's brother that was sick so long?
Yes, he had Alzheimer's.
Yeah, Jerry, I thought about it.
That's the other was his.
On an update.
You doing okay?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Really?
And that baby's doing okay.
getting everything together.
Watch the chords. I'm used to watching chords.
Yes,
It's just been up before he does.
Yeah, well, this morning I did, I was awake between 2:30 and 5, and went back to sleep, woke up, turned my alarm off, and woke up at 7:30. That was just very unusual for me to go back to sleep. And I heard him building around and.
Watching Sarah carefully today, she went so, kind of got into it last week, I didn't pay attention this week, I was like, oh, so just look at the marks, you know?
He said, "We have a time."